All of the stories I had up there have things like aliens and time travel, but also at their heart, they're about very real human responses and experiences. They're about parenting and they're about loss and memory and connection.
Samantha is a multi-award-winning science fiction and fantasy writer from right here in WA. Her short fiction has been seen in such places, and this is quite a list, as Clarksworld, Interzone, Strange Horizons, Lightspeed, Nature Magazine, Beneath Ceaseless Skies, and many other fine places.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, and thanks for coming along. I'm Samantha Murray. You can call me Sam. Write science fiction and fantasy and any other speculative type of story that occurs. I've also written the occasional play. The most recent one was for Black Swan Theatre as part of their emerging playwrights program. It was called Snow, and it was a science fiction play, of course. And in my day job, I've got a degree in maths, and I used to work in Canberra for the Australian Signals Directorate in the field of cryptography. So that was a whole lot of fun as well. I'm really, really happy to get the chance to come along and talk about writing and science fiction, because writing and science fiction are actually two of my most favourite things in the world. I've been writing for around a decade now. I looked it up and I worked out that I sold my very first story pretty much exactly 10 years ago. It was only to a small anthology at the time, but I can still remember that really fizzy thrill of getting an email that says somebody wants to buy your story and they love it, they want to publish it and release it out into the world. Adventures, I call this Adventures in Sci-Fi because this last 10 years have been full of some quite surprising adventures for me that I perhaps didn't expect when I was just starting out. Adventures such as getting to visit a tiny village in Danjai, China, and speak to some of the Miao minority group there through translators, and then be commissioned to write a story based on those experiences. One of the pictures up there is me wearing a strange silver headgear, which was the traditional festival wear that we got to try on. Adventures like going to Hollywood for a red carpet gala event, and also getting to go inside the Scientology headquarters and all of the weirdness that came along with that experience. Also getting to plant a tree for science fiction, you can see up there, when Chinese writer Han Song was named mayor for a week in the village of Danjai, and we all got to help him plant the traditional tree as part of his duties there. There's a subset of the markets that I've sold to on that screen. The one that amuses me probably the most is the Nature Magazine one there in the corner, because you might know that Nature is quite a prestigious scientific journal and it has a readership of some estimated 3 million readers per month. And so they also have a short story on their very last page of the magazine. So it's a really interesting way to sneak into Nature Magazine and impresses any of your scientific friends who are like, what, how did you make it into Nature? So I left that one up there because I love it. So I'm going to move on to... So all of the stories I had up there have things like aliens and time travel and robots and alternate dimensions and augmented reality and engineered soldier children. But also at their heart, they're about very real human responses and experiences. They're about parenting and they're about loss and memory and connection. And I think that's why this quote from Octavia E. Butler resonates with me. I was attracted to science fiction because it was wide open. I was able to do anything, and there were no walls to hem you in, and there was no human condition that you were stopped from examining. Sheila Williams says it really well on the submissions page to Asimov's magazine as well. All fiction is written to examine or illuminate some aspect of the human existence. But in science fiction, the backdrop you work against is that of the universe. Quickly take you through some of my process. Ideas. The question, how did you get your ideas, is one that you might hear often as a writer. But to be honest, ideas really are a dime a dozen. It comes from your inner what if question, and it can come from things that you're experiencing, dealing with, or grappling with in your real life. And with a slight tweak or a twist, can become a science fiction story. For example, recently I've been learning a lot about my own memory and how it works or how it doesn't work, because I actually have a really, really bad memory. And this idea has been coming through in some of my recent stories. The one I've had out recently was about aliens who don't store memories the way we do, and who jettison any knowledge that they've had upon using it, and so they're always moving forward and not looking backwards. I have a notebook by my bed, because that idea that you have just as you're drifting off to sleep, that you think, oh yeah, sure, I'll remember that one in the morning. Little tip, no, never. You can divide writers up roughly, I feel, into pantsters versus plotters. Pantsters are those who kind of wing it, get stuck in and see what happens. And there are plotters who are quite, or meticulously might plan and plot the structure of their story before they start to write. And of course, either approach is perfectly valid if it works for you. I lean towards the former. Before I write, I like to know the crux of the story. So this might be the ending, or it might be one really important emotional beat of the story that I'm sort of heading towards. Once I've got that point, I can start writing. Before I do, I usually brainstorm quite a lot, longhand, in books and scraps of paper, and being organised would definitely help then, because if you're going to write the story a bit later, tracking down all of those little scribbled bits of paper and ideas, I definitely would not recommend, even though I do it very often myself. A little talk about world building. In film, of course, which you've all been discussing and seeing here today, you can see your main character. You can see what they're wearing, you can see what they look like, the expression on their face. You can see what's right next to them and the background and the scenery. As a short story writer, you have some decisions to make. One of the big ones is this: how much are you going to do, and how much are you going to leave for your reader to do? We'll just try a little exercise. Can I get you all to close your eyes? And imagine you're on a beach. The sun is setting. Picture the clouds, the colours, the sand, the water. And we're all about science fiction here, so imagine there's also a spaceship landing on the sand just down the beach from you. Picture it as clearly as you can. Picture the door opening. Open your eyes. Can I get hands up as to who could see, when they did that, a really clear picture in their head? Yeah, quite a lot of you. And who embellished with details that didn't come from the words that I said? And again, who saw a fuzzy picture? And who saw really not much at all? A couple of you. See, I find this really fascinating, the vast difference between how much people visualise. And so it's something I've been aware of quite recently, because I don't visualise at all. Like perhaps some of the people up the back there. I've actually got something called aphantasia, which totally sounds like a made-up thing, I know. But it's a lack of an ability to picture things in your head. This probably informs my own preferences. But personally, I don't need a lot of detailed description of the environment when I'm reading. I'm not building a picture of it in my head anyway. In fact, if I'm reading a novel with a lot of description, that's the bit I'm skipping through to get to the character and to get what's happening. Your mileage, of course, might differ. A lot of writing advice out there at the moment is to really ground your reader in the scene, to tell them what they can see close up, what they can see at middle distance, and what they can see in the background. And I've seen a lot of stories that start with the description of the surroundings. But you can start your story with this beautifully written description of the moon luminous in the night sky. But for me, if you're just painting details of your setting, my response here is really, so what? If you're talking about the moon, because it gives your character an itchy, restless feeling, like there are memories that are trying to break through to the surface, then all of a sudden your world building is entwined with your character and it can become something a lot more powerful. All of my world building in my stories is channeled through my characters. The setting, the environment, the smells and the sounds, they're important because of how they're impacting my character. And if it's meaningful to my character, then it's meaningful to the story. So they're not two separate things, setting and character. I want to have a look at this one quickly. It's really old and has been floating around for decades, and you may have definitely heard it. If you haven't, it's worth looking at, and I want to give you my take on it because I think a lot of it's still really useful even today. Right. So obvious, it sounds like, of course, and yet, if you are somebody who wants to be a writer and you are actually writing, you are way ahead of the game. You are ahead of a vast lines and lines of people. You've jumped to the head of the queue. So writers as well can become so easily distracted with social media, with promoting their work, with researching, with 1,000 other things. And it's also, in this one word, I think, about not waiting. So not waiting until you have the perfect idea and you have it all resolved in your brain before you sit down and write. And not waiting until you have perfect hours of uninterrupted golden peace in order to write. A quote from Ray Bradbury is that first you jump off the cliff and you build your wings on the way down. To me, write is taking that first step off the cliff. Number 2, finish what you start. George R.R. Martin is on record as saying this was a really big one for him. Even if you get stuck in the murky middle of your story, this is the one that's telling you not to give up as your story gets difficult or unwieldy, or if you decide that you hate it. I've decided that many of my stories were crap when I was in the middle of the gloomy middle part of writing them. But once I've ploughed on through them, most of them have gone on to do really quite well for themselves, and I've discovered that actually I do kind of love them after all. This is where I disagree a little bit. I think Heinlein's kind of skips a step there in terms of your editing process. If you've got beta readers or a critique group, I think this is kind of like 2B that happens before this step. But I think what he is saying is that once you've got it out there, every time it gets rejected is not necessarily a reason to rewrite it from scratch. And he's also saying you have to get to a point where you stop fiddling with it as well. Because I've got friends and I've had stories of people who've rewritten the same one story for years. And there really is something where quantity is going to teach you a lot. And if you're still on the same one story, you're never going to get those runs on the board. Put it onto market. Once you're happy with it, get it out there. Personally, if I'm submitting a story, I'm going to start with my absolute top dream favourite market. Some people have the view that perhaps you have to build your career by starting smaller and gradually levelling up. I think start at the top, the market you love the most, whether that's pay, readership, a really beautiful hard copy, whatever it is, submit there first and don't self-reject. This one I'm a little iffy with as well. I think you can outgrow a story, But I think I also have had stories that have sold on like the 10th or the 13th submission that if I'd given up on them sooner, would have never found that home either. Okay, so once you have submitted your story and you've submitted it to your dream market, this is a really useful tool, I find, and it's data. Being a mathematician, I love data, I love the graphs. So this is actually a real snapshot from one of my stories that I'm tracking at the moment. It's to a market called Uncanny, which is a really wonderful, top-notch market at the moment, which I've never sold a story to either. So you can see that on the top panel, you can see their submissions data. You can see the one on the right is their current submissions data, and you can see that because of all of the purple. Purple are the pending submissions. Red are the rejections. You may or may not be able to pick out any teeny tiny little bits of green that are on there. This is called the submissions grinder. They tend to have about a third of perhaps all of the submissions that a market might receive, roughly. So given that latest chunk that's on the right there, which the graph below is an expansion of the one on the right, it's roughly just about under 400, and that's probably about a third of what they received in that opening period. You can see the little black dot there? That's my story. Now, so far so good, it's hanging in there. You can see the wave of red coming down. It's really interesting in terms of timing and what's going on with the market. Because if perhaps you see this wave of rejection, red rejection, passing by your story while your story is hanging on there, that might be a really good sign that it's under some serious consideration. Might make the rejection when it comes all that more crushing. And on the left there, you can also see the recent responses from that market. And as you can see, it's pretty much rejections all the way down. But rejection is actually a huge part, unfortunately. It's not really my favourite part of being a writer because the proportions are so small of the stories they accept. And even when you've built up a career, it sometimes doesn't seem to make too much difference in terms of the quantity of rejections that come pouring in. So thick skin is probably a good thing. I do have a friend who was a lovely writer, but a few rejections would really knock her about and she couldn't maintain that submitting that you need to do in order to sell those stories eventually. However, there is a slight problem with this, is that it's really, really easy to keep refreshing it and perhaps even hourly. And to that, I refer you back to Heinlein's first point, which is go and write something else. Now, I was going to read you a very, very tiny little story. It's a flash story, so it's only 700 words. And in 700 words, you don't have that much space to do something. There's pretty much space for one idea and a couple of characters. The main character in this one is a kind of computer who was made to do one very specific thing only. So, let me take my glasses off. It's called Everything That Has Already Been Said. No, I'll put them back on. Sorry, I have bad eyes and a bad memory. How are you today, my glorious monkey? Said Bevan, her creator. She wasn't really a monkey, of course. If she looked like anything, it was a golden metal girl. But she was not really a girl either. Bevan called her monkey because he liked a theorem about infinite monkeys tapping away on infinite typewriters for infinity, where eventually one of them would type the words of Shakespeare. She also knew, because he had told her, that if there were as many monkeys as there were particles in the observable universe, typing for the age of the universe, they would still be extremely unlikely to write even a complete sonnet. If she could, she would have said, I'm fine, perhaps a little lonely. But that was not something she could ever say. I am flotsam on the dry ocean of your question, she replied instead, in her low musical lilt. Bevan's eyes brightened at the sound. You're always so poetic, monkey, he said, much more so than the others I made before you. You're not made for gibberish. All of your constructions have meaning. But I didn't expect them to be so... It's beautiful. You're beautiful. If she had been made that way, she would have smiled. He kept her well polished. Her burnished metal skin shone, and her scent was the faintest tang of ozone and sunflowers and honey. "You are unique, Monkey," Bevan said, his hand against the gold of her cheek. "You are always new, never derivative." He had made her so. She streamed the net, accessing digital information, every book ever scanned. She illegally tapped all voice, text, and radio video communications. She was swimming in data. It felt to her like dreaming. She never forgot anything. She was only capable of combinations that hadn't occurred before, anywhere in her recording. No sentence past her lips had ever been uttered. It came whole and newborn into the world as she said it, every time. "I'm so weary of repetition, Monkey." Bevan's voice was soft, confidential. "All of the people who said the same kinds of things to me over and over. You will never amount to anything," they said. "Let me help you," they said. "You are brilliant," they said. "You are sick," they said. "It gets old, Monkey, all of it. But not you. You are always the future, never the past, while I am simply boring." "You are not ordinary," she would have said to him. "You could never be boring." "I am misted within at the purple of your speaking," she tried. But he grinned at her, and she knew he did not understand. She carried within her a hard, cold stone of fear, small but very dense. She felt data sigh through her. She worried that all of her scanning and searching wasn't enough. She knew people had said things out of her hearing or back in the past, unrecorded. If she was not unique, if she was not perfect, then what was she? If by mistake she said something that someone else had once uttered, surely she would crack right down the centre in that instance with the shame and transgression. "At last, Monkey," Bevan said. His hair was whiter than she remembered. He told her that the past was written on the atoms of the universe, if you could read them. He told her she would be able to read them. He would have to move her again, this time to her very own planet. She was already much larger than she used to be and could no longer move through the world, but it didn't matter. The world came to her, and so, sometimes, did Bevan. "Starshine gleefully falling as rain bleeds," she told him. "My clever monkey," said Bevan, patting her golden shoulder, although the effort seemed to cost him. She did not so much resemble a girl anymore, but she still had her face, her arms. "You are my best work. You will go on forever forwards, that's all I need." She was not just his monkey, she realised. She was his typewriter too. She was his infinity. She thought of being alone in a universe of particles and words and hypothetical monkeys without him. Something whirred and thrummed inside her, but she stayed silent. "I love you" had already been said, too many times. So, questions? Thank you.
If you've actually written a book and you go to actually send it off to a publisher to be reviewed, what's the process in that?
Well, I write short stories, so the process is a little bit different to novels. But you're interested in hearing the short story process? Yes. So I'll write a story. I might give it to a critique group, or I might not, depending on how that goes. And the grinder that's up here actually is a really good search tool if you're looking for a market. You can enter by genre, by word count, by pay, by market, prestige and awards, and you can come up with a set of potential markets to send your story to. Of course, if you've been in the game for a while, you know exactly the markets in the beginning that you really want to crack or that you want to send your story to. So when you've got your story and you're happy with it, there's usually, which is great now, an online submission tool, which is different from every market. And sometimes every market can have their own little quirks of, oh, we want you to put it in this format, or we want you to do that, or we want you to make it anonymous. So you have to go and read all of those instructions. And you fill in your details, you fill in your cover letter, which is some stuff out there about cover letters which says, go put in a premise, tell them why they need to buy your book, give a summary. No, don't do any of that. The best cover letters will say, this is my name, this is my story, this is the length. If you've got any credits in the industry, you might list 3. Thank you for your time. Put your story in, send it off, log it onto the grinder, cross your fingers, try and forget about it and write something else.
Yeah, best method for eliminating writer's block.
So it's tricky because life happens, and especially with the world as it is, there can be all sorts of things that get in your way of writing. For me, I think the butt in chair, number one, writing, even though you don't think you can, if you actually give yourself that time to sit down, and even if you're writing crap or something you don't think will make it there, pushing through it for however long that takes is pretty much the only thing you can do. Because I think going and waiting until you feel like, oh, I'm not blocked, I can write again, could be years, could be forever. So potentially you might be blocked with one particular story you're trying to tell, your novel or your latest work in progress. It might be a good shift to change to something else. Maybe a play, maybe poetry, maybe a blog post. But if you can rack up the hours in the chair, I feel like you can get through it eventually.
How important do you feel that it is to share your words with a group?
Do you mean before I've sent it off to a market? It's really different for different people. I do it occasionally, but I've also been known to just be impatient and say, oh, I like the story, I'm just going to send it out there. It can be very, very useful. Part of it depends on whether you're someone who really likes the editing, part of it depends on your first draft. Some people can write a really clean first draft, which doesn't mean that the people who write that one on the 8th draft it's just a different process. If you write a clean first draft, potentially you can just ship it out. If you're someone who wants to go through it a bunch of times and finds it's improving it and tuning it as you go, then that writers group can be really, really helpful. I find as long as when they give you feedback, you don't just necessarily go, oh great, I will rewrite it according to that feedback, because so many subjective opinions. If you find something that multiple people have said the same thing, that might be worth addressing. If you hear that comment and you think, yeah, actually, I thought that might be an issue, that's probably something that you should address as well. If it gives you that feeling of, oh yeah, I really do secretly agree with you, I just don't want to do that work, then you should go and address it. But I ignore a lot of the feedback I get. I just pick the bits that respond, that resonate with me and do something about it. So it can be really, really valuable, but I don't think it's essential depending on the writer that you are.
If any, do you have a certain plot structure that you go by when writing your stories?
I don't think I necessarily do. I think I might have an intrinsic one that I don't make explicit. I do like to, as I mentioned, that combination of channeling setting through character and then having an external idea or plot that matches whatever that internal journey is that the character's going through. If you can align those things up together, then you can come with something that really becomes really powerful. So I don't necessarily look at the try-fail cycles, for example, that some people do, where they set up your character, give them a problem, let them make many attempts to solve it, have hardships, finally they solve it, there you are. My stories tend to be more character-driven than that. So I'm not going on an explicit plot structure, even though I know it can work for many writers.
Thanks, Sam. Let's show Sam our thanks.
Thank you.